Who said you could sit? I'm sorry. You're such a clueless and embarrassing daughter-in-law. My mother-in-law had just tripped me by kicking my leg, and now she was acting all sweet and smiley to the relatives around her. Nearby people offered to help me up, but my mother-in-law stopped them. I held on to my aching left leg, still slightly swollen from where I fractured it a month ago. She was showing off to the relatives, treating me like a mere servant. But then, someone showed up, and just like that, her reputation crumbled. My name is Mary, I'm 25 years old, and I live with my husband. We both work full-time. I met my husband at a matchmaking event organized by a friend. Back then, I thought getting married was silly, and I was too shy to even think about dating someone. I was always so focused on my studies that I didn't have many friends. A few of my close friends were worried I might end up single and lonely, so they insisted I come to the event. I wasn't looking for a life partner, but by chance I met Brian, who is 4 years older than me. He was a senior colleague of the friend who invited me. Apparently, Brian was also dragged to the event. My friend told me, if you don't find anyone else you like, just chat with this guy. So I did. It turned out Brian felt the same way. He later told me he'd only be with me if there weren't any other women he liked. In the end, we got together. I did go to a singles event and later started dating Brian, just like my friend suggested. My friend thought Brian and I had similar vibes and would be a good match, and they were right. While we weren't finishing each other's sentences, there were times when I could guess what Brian was thinking, and he seemed to understand me too. We had a comfortable, friendly relationship and eventually got married quite naturally. Up to that point, everything had been smooth, and I was surprised that someone like me, who isn't great at socializing, got married. But then things got tough. Brian's family home was as far as taking a high-speed train from my hometown, like traveling from New Hampshire to Michigan. I moved in with my in-laws as soon as we got married. Living with in-laws might make some think of drama, and I hoped Brian's parents would be as laid back as he is. But the moment I stepped into their house, an older woman, who turned out to be Brian's mom, commented on my messy hair before I could even speak. I tried to stay polite and handed her a gift box I had brought, trying to hide my nervousness. She said she was busy, told me to get ready and come to the kitchen right away, and then disappeared into a room. My father-in-law, who had been quiet, took the gift but didn't make eye contact and mumbled as he walked away. Brian just went inside without saying anything to explain or apologize. I felt uneasy about the brief glimpse of family dynamics I had seen, but I didn't have time to hesitate as my mother-in-law had instructed me. I handed my luggage to Brian and quickly went to the kitchen. Hearing my footsteps, my mother-in-law turned around and gave me a sharp look. "Don't you tie your hair back when you cook at home? Do you have a tradition where a husband drinks tea made from his wife's hair or something?" She seemed to have purposely called my naturally curly hair messy earlier. I wasn't expecting to start cooking as soon as I arrived, and she didn't like that my hair was only half up. "I'm sorry, I'll tie it back and come right back," I said. As I was about to leave the kitchen, she added, "Don't you dare drop even a strand of your uncultured hair. And if you're going to tie it, these hold the best," handing me a pile of rubber bands. I was somewhat prepared to be bullied as the new daughter-in-law, but I hadn't expected such direct hostility. My mother-in-law was hard to deal with. Most people think mothers bully their daughters-in-law because they feel their son has been taken away, but it wasn't like that with her. She was tough on Brian and my father-in-law too, especially towards Brian. She'd often say, "You're so weak-willed that you could only get a good-for-nothing wife like her, or, despite me constantly telling you not to turn out like your dad." She was really harsh with her words. Brian and my father-in-law just stayed quiet, not fighting back at all. I figured she must have some kind of condition where she can't survive without making snide remarks. I managed to endure that. However, there were times when she was in a particularly bad mood, and only my meal wouldn't be served. Brian and my father-in-law saw this, but both pretended not to notice. Brian, trying to please her, would even join in on her nasty remarks about me. Despite being a grown man, he didn't have the courage to stand up to his mother. He acted as if everything his mom said was right, blaming me for it. It made me sad, and at the same time, I was completely shocked by his attitude. During these times, my father-in-law would try to be as invisible as possible, quickly leaving the room whenever my mother-in-law started criticizing me. It became clear that not only Brian, but also my father-in-law, couldn't stand up to her harsh words. She would say, "You married into our family, so you have no right to talk back to me. Everything you have now is thanks to my father. If you have any complaints, why don't you speak up? You'd be cursed by my father." It didn't seem like my father-in-law was afraid of being cursed, but he seemed to feel less important because he married into the family. Having seen his father being submissive to his mother since he was young, Brian probably realized that his mother was the strongest in the family. Just like his father, he always tried to gauge his mother's mood and would either stay silent or agree with her, no matter what she said. I was already anxious about living in my in-laws' house and soon faced a challenge from the day we started living together. I was made to accompany my mother-in-law on her weekly grocery and household shopping trips. One day, after getting used to carrying bags full in both hands, I went to the usual supermarket that my mother-in-law always frequents. It was a weekend, so the elevator we usually took was crowded and we couldn't use it right away. Impatient, my mother-in-law quickly grew frustrated that there wasn't a single elevator on the ground floor and exclaimed, "Forget it, it's a waste of time to wait here. Let's just use the stairs." Though she always has me fetch even just a single TV remote for her, it was surprising to hear such words from her. If I dared to speak out, I felt like she might just bite my head off, so I silently obeyed, walking slightly behind my fast-paced mother-in-law. I reached out instinctively when she almost tripped over the hem of her dress. In that split second, I stretched out my hand and supported her back to prevent her from falling. But in doing so, I lost my balance and ended up tumbling down a few steps. Until then, everything had been okay. However, because I wasn't watching my own step, I lost my balance and fell. "Hey, what the heck are you doing?" Instead of showing concern, my mother-in-law scolded me. Oddly enough, I was more surprised by her reaction than the pain I felt. I had only fallen down a few steps, but it looked like I had twisted my ankle badly. My ankle started swelling quickly, and my mother-in-law clicked her tongue in annoyance. "You're so clumsy. With that ankle, you won't be able to carry the groceries properly. Just wait in the car, it's pointless having you here." It felt pretty harsh, considering I got hurt while trying to help her. But if I mentioned that, she'd probably snap at me even more. So I quietly went back to the car, reclined the seat, and took a rest. The next day, after the household chores were done, I went to the doctor around noon. I thought it was just a sprain, but it turned out to be a hairline fracture, and they gave me crutches for the way home. I texted my mother-in-law about it, letting her know I'd gotten medicine and would be a bit late. The lack of response was typical, showing she didn't care at all. Struggling with the crutches I wasn't used to, I got home only to be immediately told by my mother-in-law, "Change the light bulb in the bathroom. The ceiling is high, so just use the ladder from the backyard and make sure to clean that dirty floor." I was taken aback by her usual uncaring attitude. It wasn't that I wanted her to be concerned for me, but there was no immediate need to use the bathroom. And couldn't the light bulb replacement wait for Brian or the father-in-law to get back from work? Having someone with a bad leg climb up a ladder on a slippery floor showed my mother-in-law's lack of humanity. Of course, when Brian and my father-in-law came home, neither showed any concern. All I got was my mother-in-law yelling at me for not doing chores efficiently with my injured foot. From that point, her mistreatment of me intensified. Although she didn't lay a hand on me, I was constantly bombarded with cruel words, increasing my stress. About a month into this life, While I was weeding the garden and protecting my slowly healing foot, my mother-in-law approached me. "There's a family dinner next week. Knowing you, you don't have any formal dresses, right? I'll lend you one of mine, but make sure you fix that messy hair of yours for the day." Ever since the marriage, she had made me quit my job. I had no money of my own, yet my mother-in-law never stopped taking digs, even about the texture of my hair. Thanks to her, I always had to tie my hair up tightly, which made me feel like I was aging. Brian told me that family dinners are held about once every 5 months, and everyone there has a high social status. They are either highly educated and work at major companies or are entrepreneurs with many employees. They're all top people in their fields. When I actually went, I saw everyone standing in groups, chatting in the parking lot of the fancy restaurant. Although I was new, many people came up to talk to me, but my mother-in-law almost always cut in. "This is my daughter-in-law, Mary." Sure, she's dressed up nicely now, but on a regular day, she'd be in sweatpants with messy hair. It seemed she put in extra effort today knowing she'd meet all of you. Honestly, it's a bit much, isn't it? Despite the awkward smiles from others, my mother-in-law kept speaking badly about me. Someone kind tried to change the topic, but my husband Brian either stayed silent or just nodded along with whatever his mom said. My mother-in-law sweet-talked everyone in a sickly sweet tone and even handed out small gifts to each person. When we finally entered the restaurant, the seating seemed to follow some unspoken rules. I was about to sit next to Brian, but my mother-in-law, who was talking with someone, quickly came over. "What do you think you're doing sitting down? As a daughter-in-law, stand up." Incredibly, she kicked my injured left foot. Losing my balance, I fell hard to the ground. I let out a soft cry, writhing in pain. I had just had the cast removed, so there was no protection, and I felt the pain directly. Looking down at me, my mother-in-law quickly said to the others, "I apologize for the scene. My lack of discipline has caused this embarrassing display. She should at least fake it better. Right after her own carelessness got her injured, she only knows how to play for sympathy." My mother-in-law may have been panicking inwardly at my fall, talking nonsense rapidly. A few nearby people offered to help me up, but she stopped them all. "It's all right, no need to be kind to a liar. I'll give her a piece of my mind, so don't you worry about it." She grabbed my arm, trying to force me up while swiftly taking her own seat. I was sitting on the cushion, feeling like just a doll as my mother-in-law controlled everything. The looks from people around us made me feel embarrassed and annoyed. I took a deep breath, ready to say how I felt, but then someone walked up from behind, brushed past me, and touched my mother-in-law's back. "Oh, big mother-in-law," she exclaimed in surprise, recognizing it was my husband's grandmother. The woman looked elegant in her pale-colored dress, but her expression was serious. "I heard you weren't coming today," she said. "Well, I did say I might not make it because I had other plans, but I made a reservation just in case." "What? Shouldn't I have come?" "No, it's not that. I'm delighted," my mother-in-law responded, suddenly looking timid and scared. The big mother-in-law instructed my father-in-law to start eating and led my mother-in-law to a corner of the room. When I tried to stand up, the big mother-in-law stopped me. "You've got that leg injury, right? It's not good to strain yourself. Just relax and sit next to Brian." Her authority was clear, so I just did as she said. As the big mother-in-law was about to sit down, my mother-in-law, still in the corner, spoke up. Big mother-in-law, what is it? You should just stand there. If you have something to say it from there." Without even looking back, the big mother-in-law sharply replied, "Why do I have to stand? I came because I wanted to dine with you." Murmurs from other relatives made my mother-in-law's face turn even redder. What a ridiculous thing to say. Did you really think, being just the daughter-in-law, you can sit? It's about what you said to Mary earlier, isn't it? Don't you think you should set an example? Faced with the big mother-in-law's firm response, my mother-in-law's face turned an even brighter red. Soft chuckles came from somewhere in the room. You used to be such a sweet girl when I first met you. When did you become so mean? If I knew you were like this, I wouldn't have let my son marry into your family. Well, my son did run away from home because he didn't like me, so I can't say much. My father-in-law, seated in front of me, shifted uncomfortably. It turns out the silly reason my father-in-law married into the family wasn't because of a lack of heirs or any special reason but seemingly to escape his strict mother. The big mother-in-law just wouldn't stop talking, and everyone had stopped eating and was listening intently. I was shocked when he ran away from home, only to return casually with a wife and son. You'd think they had done a great job raising their child, but there they were, both of them pretending not to see their daughter-in-law being mistreated right in front of them. From the daughter-in-law's point of view, she must feel like she married into quite the family, huh? Why don't you three show everyone those stunned faces of yours? Big mother-in-law pointed at the father-in-law and Brian, who were seated, making them stand next to the mother-in-law. These folks are a disgrace, being rude to relatives who've come from afar. Remember them well. I felt she might be going too far, but seeing the three of them with their heads down made me feel better. All eyes were on them when the mother-in-law spoke up again. Big mother-in-law, I've been trying to discipline this failure of a daughter-in-law. She barely does her chores, using her foot injury as an excuse, and even pretends to be in pain in public. My husband and son listen to me, but the daughter-in-law's defiance disrupts our household order. While accusing others, the mother-in-law pretended to wipe tears with her sleeve, leaving me speechless. Big mother-in-law, who had been silent, sighed deeply and said, "Even if Mary were a worthless daughter-in-law, aren't you just as bad for kicking her in front of not only relatives but also guests? You oppress your husband and son and use violence against a daughter-in-law just because she doesn't obey. You're like a frog in a well, thinking it knows everything." Mother-in-law finally fell silent at big mother-in-law's stern yet calm voice. The trio, including mother-in-law, stood in the corner for a good hour. In the end, big mother-in-law let them eat because it'd be a waste of food to leave it. After the meal, I stopped big mother-in-law to express my deepest gratitude. Although she still looked serious, she advised, "Don't hesitate to cut off anyone who treats you poorly." Her gaze seemed gentler than before. When I got home, my in-laws and Brian were already waiting at the front door. "I bet you haven't been able to clean the yard since you've been out all day. Please take care of weeding, trimming the bushes, watering the flowers, and sweeping the porch. After that, we'd like a massage, so hurry back when you're done." It seemed that to get over the embarrassment caused by big mother-in-law, my mother-in-law gave me more chores than usual. Father-in-law and Brian were quiet, but their stares were clearly mean. They blocked my way, not letting me step inside the house. So I sighed. "Oh, so you always get treated like this, huh?" Peeking out from behind me was big mother-in-law. She had actually asked me to come here. Seeing her, the four stiffened up even more. Noticing the large bags big mother-in-law was carrying, their expressions grew tenser. "Mom, you came all this way even though you're busy?" For the first time in a while, father-in-law spoke up, only to be glared at by big mother-in-law. "You guys are the ones piling on unnecessary work, even though you know she's busy. From what I've seen, a little trouble wouldn't make you reflect on your actions," big mother-in-law said, handing a bag each to father-in-law and Brian. Upset with their behavior at today's dinner, big mother-in-law had decided to move in for a while to discipline the four. During this time, she advised me to go back to my parents' house and even said that if things didn't improve, it might be best to consider divorce. We're about to start living together, and I'm so excited that I ended up bringing a lot of stuff to make Mary turn her attention back to Brian, and for you two to remember the love you once had. I'm going to guide you wholeheartedly." The first time I saw big mother-in-law smile, it had a mysterious charm that was both unsettling yet comforting. The next day, I contacted my parents and decided to take a short trip back to my childhood home. Brian tried to take advantage of this and snatched my phone, insisting he'd come with me. I stopped him when my dad shouted over the phone, "If you're the kind of man who just watches while my daughter is mistreated, she's better off without you. Don't show your face again." Brian felt down again after ignoring me for so long. I was shocked to see Brian trying to rely on my parents without any shame. Any affection I had left for him disappeared completely. Knowing how tough his mother-in-law could be, it seemed like Brian agreed to live with her because he was afraid to say no. He put me in a tough spot, hoping to avoid her anger. Father-in-law probably behaves the same way. He too would stay quiet even when Brian was being scolded. I hope that now all four will learn from the much tougher big mother-in-law and become better people. However, since then, while I've been relaxing at my childhood home, I get calls almost every day. Most of the time it's from my mother-in-law, but sometimes it's from father-in-law or Brian. Brian keeps saying, "Can you ask big mother-in-law to leave?" He repeats this over and over without any hesitation. With me gone, all four are being strictly taught household chores by big mother-in-law, and they tell me they're sore every day. On top of the physical exhaustion, they can't vent their frustrations on a daughter-in-law, so the atmosphere at home is always tense. It's not just big mother-in-law. She's been calling relatives over unannounced for surprise inspections. The three of them have to entertain the guests, spending their days in constant tension. They all kept playing the victim, saying things like, "Kick out big mother-in-law and come back. Why are we going through this?" So I declared our divorce over the phone. Normally, it's something to discuss face to face, but given how poorly they treated me, I figured I wasn't wrong to do it this way. With big mother-in-law's help, the divorce process went smoothly. I continued to stay at my childhood home, searched for a job, and decided to start a new life. Half a year later, a minor incident occurred at my workplace. Shockingly, my ex-husband and in-laws had tracked down my workplace and showed up unannounced. I wondered how they found out, but then I got a call from big mother-in-law. She told me that a letter I sent was opened without permission. Maybe that's how they knew. I calmed down the apologetic big mother-in-law and assured her that there was no harm done. At the entrance of my company, the three of them were held back by multiple security guards. Watching quietly from the floor above, I noticed they were repeatedly mentioning my name. They probably couldn't handle the scolding from big mother-in-law any longer, but considering the mother-in-law used to curse at me every day and both the father-in-law and Brian ignored it, it's no surprise they're in this situation now. I don't feel any sympathy for them being handled by the security, and I don't want them in my sight anymore. Besides, I already had someone special in my life. This person respects my feelings and confidently shares his own opinions. He's someone I can really rely on. To be honest, I'm not yet brave enough to think about marriage, but I'm going to take it slow and nurture our love.